this. Let's see what they were saying on this website. First of all, in this article, which is entitled, "Will You Need an Immunity Passport to Travel?" It says the global economy has been severely disrupted by COVID-19, with the virus wreaking particular devastation on the travel industry. Now, Coroni is particularly confused about this because Coroni wasn't aware that, in fact, an aircraft could become infected by this virus, but that seems to be the implication of what the BBC has written there, because they're saying quite clearly that the virus wreaked havoc, devastation on the travel industry, not government policy, not decisions by the industry itself as a result of government policy. No, it was the virus that did it. So Coroni's confused about that. But anyway, it goes on to say this. An immunity passport is a presentable proof of immunity to COVID-19, said Hussein Kasai, the co-founder and CEO of Infido, a London-based technology company specializing in facial biometric certification. And Coroni was confused about this as well, because Coroni's wondering, well, is this article actually real, or is it shilling for tech companies that are actually attempting to sell the idea of an immunity passport to governments? And so Coroni's a bit confused about that. But of course, it's not just the BBC that's shilling for this idea, because as we pointed out last week, this gentleman, Lieutenant Colonel Tobias Elwood from 77 Brigade, also an MP, also shilling for this idea because he's talking about developing a national database to track progress and issue vaccination certificates, which is a type of immunity passport. And he went on to say, which will probably have to be internationally recognized in order to allow travel. So the question is, what kind of immunity passport might be internationally recognized? Well, let's have a look at what kind, because it's been in the press in the last couple of days. Here's an example of it. Big names in travel back, Common Pass, new digital health passport to restart travel. And this is from Skift, but it's been in other places as well. So they're talking about Common Pass. Now, what is Common Pass? Well, let's have a look. It is created by this organization, the Commons Project. And the Commons Project says that they are a non-profit public trust established to build platforms and services to make life better for people around the world. They believe that everyone should enjoy the full benefit of technology and data while maintaining control over their digital lives. We believe that communities are stronger when data is open and can be shared for the benefit of all. And they say they're unlocking the full potential of technology and data for the common good. But who's behind this? Well, the Commons Project was established with support from the Rockefeller Foundation. Of course. So what is it that they are doing? Well, three main areas of interest: common health, COVID check, and Common Pass. Common Health is a way to share your health data in an open and free way with all and sundry. COVID check helps you check your symptoms and make sure that you don't have COVID. And Common Pass, of course, is the immunity passport. And so here is Common Pass. For global travel and trade to return to pre-pandemic levels, travellers will need a secure and verifiable way to document their health status as they travel and cross borders. And the Commons Project, together with the World Economic Forum, is working to initiate the Common Pass framework to address these challenges. So again, we have the World Economic Forum involved in this, and of course they're driving this idea of a great reset at the moment, Patrick. So I'm going to suggest that based on what we understand so far, the reason that the Passport Office logo was on that advice for doctors is because the Passport Office is now front and central involved in the whole health arena. We are going to see immunity passports. We are not going to be released from any kind of lockdown until we have those, because if you remember what Tobias Elwood was talking about was the period, the transition period, as he called it, of about a year but from now until a vaccine is actually available to a reasonable number of people. And during that transition period, there are going to be other measures that allow people to get back to a more normal mode of life. But this is one of these things that people are going to have to choose whether they accept or not, or whether they're going to resist this type of thing. Because of course, if the way that this is going to be presented, Patrick, is that we are returning to normality with the benefit of this type of thing. We didn't have this before. And so this type of surveillance and this type of tracking and tracing and so on.
Merging ID with the medical industry, basically.
Absolutely. And so this is not returning to the normal we had before. This is what they've been calling the new normal. And I don't think this is a direction of travel that we should be encouraging. And we, as individuals, we've got to decide whether we're going to accept it or not.
This is an outright deception. They're calling it normal or returning to normal, and it's not normal as before. It's not normal pre-COVID. It's an absolute deception. And the thing that jumped out is that you need to prove your health status. So your health status, according to this system, Mike, this technocracy system, has nothing to do with your actual health and your actual well-being, how healthy you are, how fit you are, how well you eat, how low your stress levels are, and how long you're going to live. Has nothing to do with that. According to these technocrats, your health status has to do with how many vaccines you've had, basically, full stop. Or whether they're absolutely flawed tests, say that you supposedly have coronavirus. So they're using COVID-19 or coronavirus, which on the scale of deadly viruses and seasonal respiratory pathogens isn't particularly deadly, Mike, compared to many others, okay? I'm talking about TB and a number of other things. But they're using it as a Trojan horse, as a facade to overlay a new system of biosurveillance that's going to be more intrusive than anything anyone has ever seen, ever, okay? And they want this to be permanent. So absolute command and control of where you can go, where you can move, what venues you can step into, who you can associate with, whether you can get an education in person, face to face, whether you can operate a business, whether you can go into a business. All of this is being controlled through this biosurveillance program that they're attempting to push through under the color of COVID. Because in reality, there is no pandemic right now in terms of what is the common definition of a pandemic according to the World Health Organization. It doesn't rise to the level right now of epidemic or pandemic, right now, today. Okay.
And in fact, as we have made the point many times, Patrick, there's a big question mark over whether there ever was, even at the height of the pandemic in April, whether it was actually a pandemic or whether the excess mortality was being caused by the fact that the NHS was shut down and care homes were not getting the medical support that they needed. And
cooking the books on death certificates and record keeping and things like that.
So it's questionable whether there has ever been a pandemic from the beginning, but that's...
You can make that argument, and many have, many have. So.
Generally make this statement. He said, "I've never stated that vaccines would be mandatory." Now, of course, he may not have done in so many words, but the truth is that actually vaccines are going to be mandatory. We've given a hint in the previous segment about how it will be effectively mandatory, whether the government claims that it's mandatory or not. They're not going to pass any legislation because that would be too controversial, but they're going to make it effectively mandatory because it's going to be a requirement to actually do anything. Well, let's just give you an example of how this is already happening. So this was sent to me this morning. Thank you very much for the person who sent it. It's a letter from an NHS trust to a patient. Let's just have a look at the detail of it. Because it says this: "I'm writing following our telephone conversation to confirm that your hysterectomy, which was listed for 6th October 2020, has now been cancelled." It says, "During our telephone conversation, as well as in your pre-assessment, you made it very clear that you do not wish to have the pre-operative COVID swab done, although you're happy with the 14-day self-isolation." Now, I'm not going to comment on whether or not it's appropriate to have a pre-operative COVID swab. People can make their own minds up about that. That's not what this is about. This is about the fact that this person's operation was cancelled because they made a choice, and the choice was a lot lower down the scale than the choice about whether to take a vaccination or not. So that choice was made, and this was the result. It went on to say, "I'm afraid, therefore, that we cannot proceed with your surgical procedure on the planned date. I've removed your name from the waiting list as the current policy is unlikely to change for the foreseeable future." So in other words, because somebody pushed back a little bit on a requirement made by, and the question is whether the requirement is even appropriate. We're going to come on to that in a second. But on because somebody pushed back on a requirement that an official decided on they have had NHS treatment withdrawn from them. This is going to be the same as we move along towards a vaccine. That's the nature of how this stuff becomes mandatory. Because if you're having healthcare removed on the basis of making a choice, it's effectively mandatory.
So if they're denying access
Yes.
to normal NHS care if you don't comply with the various COVID testing regimes and biosurveillance. Absolutely disingenuous. So you remember the whole furore over Cambridge Analytica? Did that not dominate the headlines? We had those long, dramatic, very compelling hearings on TV for months and months and months. Well, here we find out this week, and that inflated bubble, unfortunately, just popped, Mike, this week. This is the Information Commissioner's final report onto Cambridge Analytica here. Well, what we're going to show you is not really in the headline of this, but you dig into the article and you can see, well, the final conclusion, Mike, is that Cambridge Analytica did not meddle in the Brexit Leave campaign. So no further evidence to change my earlier view that SCL, the parent company of Cambridge Analytica, were not involved in the EU referendum campaign in the UK, and also the group's famous marketing slogan, we've got 5,000 data points on every individual, was also deemed to be an exaggeration, Mike. So just back to this point. So Carol Cadwalader, who's an Integrity Initiative journalist, she was outed as an Integrity Initiative journalist for The Guardian. She raked up tons of awards on the back of this story that Cambridge Analytica meddled in the Brexit referendum process. And they won BAFTAs for a documentary called The Great Hack on Netflix. It just cleaned up on the awards. She took home a Pulitzer Prize on the back of this story, which we now know is a fake story. So all of her work was basically based on a lie. And she cleaned up with Pulitzers, BAFTA awards, and featured in this Netflix documentary. I mean,
well, I presume she'll be given the BAFTAs and the Pulitzer back.
She should return the Pulitzer, really. Do you think she will?
No.
I don't think so. This is how the establishment works. They create awards for people who push propaganda and who push their lies. And shame on The Guardian for not even doing the due diligence on this and so many other stories. This reminds me so much of the White Helmets as well, in terms of sort of wholesale fraud of a narrative. But Russiagate as well is baked into this, because the Russians, the whole campaign and the whole propaganda campaign, the Russians were backing Brexit or somehow involved in meddling in the Brexit vote. So this was all part of the anti-Trump and anti-Russian effort from 2017, 2018 and on. And so now it's just collapsed into a heap of ash. Are we surprised?
No. Just before we move on, Patrick, to the last story, what is the situation with the election in the United States? How is Trump doing?
Trump is doing. It's Biden is ahead in the polls, if you believe all the mainstream polls.
But wasn't Hillary Clinton ahead in the polls in 2016?
Yeah. So in that sense, right now we're seeing a repeat of a kind of a pattern of what happened in 2016 with this overestimation that Hillary Clinton was, had a landslide potential lead over Trump going into the final stretch of the election cycle. And now with Biden, it's almost mirroring it identically. So in terms of the poll lead, 14, 16%, things like that. So we're seeing the exact same thing happen now, although it's, I think, more distorted now than it was in 2016 for a number of different reasons, one of which is the Democratic Party is not really unified at all behind Biden and Kamala Harris. So there's splits. Mainly I'm talking about the Berners, the Bernie Sanders crowd. So that makes this kind of overestimation even more distorted. So it is very much neck and neck. And we've looked at the polls and the potential voting and where we think states are going to be, heading on election day. And it does look like it's going to be absolutely razor thin. It will come down to literally 1 or 2 states in electoral votes. But we have Donald Trump at the moment, it looks like winning by a very slim margin on the day. But the story might not end there. The Democrats have made threats. A number of different plots have been hatched to extend the vote counting period for weeks after November 3rd, and doing so under the guise of we need to count all the postal ballots. So now we course, now we know why the Democrats were pushing for this universal postal voting from early in the summer under the color of COVID, saying, oh, it's not safe to go to the polling in person on the day, so it's better to vote at home in the safety of your home and then post the vote in. But the problem is the ballots need to be postmarked by November 3rd, which means they could arrive and be counted all the way up till November 10th. That's a full week after the election. And we all saw what happened in the US after George Floyd, for instance, or even after the last Trump election in 2016. There was rioting in multiple cities, arson, mobs were coming out and tearing apart Oakland, Portland, parts of LA. They're protesting all over the place.
There are many more people activated for that type of protest now than there were at that time.
10 times more.
Yes.
10 times more. So the Democrat strategy seems to be they want to buy time after the election to sort of extend or to not recognize the result of the voting on the day. And then you could have chaos. You could have little pockets of Civil War type, not a full-on Civil War, but you could have, really heated partisan face-offs and possibly street violence.
I think one of the things that concerned me most about this potential, Patrick, and I talked about this with Richard Black on. If anybody hasn't seen the discussion that I had with former State Senator Richard Black, have a look on the UK Columns YouTube channel for that discussion, because of course what Nancy Pelosi and others have been saying is that if Trump is still in office in January, they want him removed physically.
That's right.
And they're talking about calling in the army to help do that. Now, that takes things to a whole new level.
And she's also, just yesterday, she announced that she's putting together a special 25th Amendment committee to basically decide whether the president is mentally fit, according to the 25th Amendment, that gives Congress an open door to, again, a type of impeachment, if you will, to deem the president not mentally fit to perform the duties of the office. So they'd just done that last night. So that was the third or fourth coup plot that's been hashed, and that's a very desperate move. So basically, they've lined up 4 or 5 different contingencies, and they're going to go for everything. Basically, it's going to be a full court press. So it's going to be ugly. I said this last week on the Sunday Wire. On our radio show every Sunday at 21st Century Wire, the Sunday Wire, I said it's going to be messy. Expect it.
And a lot of the mess is going to come from the mainstream press, which universally despises Trump.
Oh, they're going to be all totally on board with the chaos and saying, oh, we can't recognize this result. There needs to be a recount. And it'll go all the way up to the Supreme Court if necessary. And that will take you right into December, basically. All bets are off. For the month of November, anything could happen.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll be calling for the president to step down. If he wins, or if he's deemed to be the winner, they're not going to accept it, and most likely the mob will, like they do in the Ukraine or Belarus with the Color Revolution, they'll say he needs to go, he needs to step down.